So a particular focus of a lot of my content, as many of you have noticed, is the big subject of space junk and the danger that it could represent to our future in space and indeed to our entire economy and civilization. And as you can see from this particular animation, the growth of debris in low Earth orbit and beyond has been nothing short of cataclysmic. I mean, these are just the things that we can observe, the things that we can track, and there are hundreds of thousands of other objects that are simply too small for us to notice, and yet large enough and fast enough to do a substantial amount of damage to any given satellite. So that having been the case, a lot of agencies, a lot of space organizations, mostly governmental, across the world have been trying to address this issue. The problem is, it's been a lot of talk and very little action and not very much government funding. The European Space Agency, as I have mentioned before, and the UK Space Agency in particular, have been working in conjunction with a variety of different companies and academic institutions in order to try to do something about this problem. The investment, although not tremendous, has at least been fairly substantial by United Kingdom standards. We're talking about £16 million worth of investment in space sustainability through the ESA, including a recent program of £2.7 million, or a little over $3 million for this particular problem. Now, once again, that is a very small investment compared to a lot of other projects that are out there, but given the size of the UK Space Agency, it's not that tremendously small. But what about the United States? Have we started to finally take action on this particular issue, especially given that the US and Russia have contributed the most when it comes to space junk? Yeah, sure, the Russians may have contributed a lot recently with that incredibly ill-advised anti-sat weapon test, but that doesn't mean the US hasn't contributed in a huge way as well. But what have we really done about it? Well, finally, the US Space Force is going to take on this issue head on. Sorta. Recently, General David Thompson of the U.S. Space Force was excited to announce, quote, the first space prime effort called Orbital Prime, which will invigorate the on-orbit servicing, assembly, and manufacturing market using active debris remediation, or ADR, as a use case for foundational technologies. So this is essentially priming the future of space debris removal. So finally, the U.S. Space Force, who has a lot to lose if something serious happens in low Earth orbit, like for example the Kessler syndrome, is addressing this problem and is going to bring all of the might of the US military to bear on this issue until we have it dealt with. Or are they? My name is Jordan Wright. I was born in the same year that the human race took its first steps on the surface of another world, and then we promptly betrayed those people's legacy by never going back. But now, over half a century later, there's a new breed of pioneers that are seeking to finish what these people set out to do so long ago. But there is trouble as well, so it's time for commentators like me to stop being polite and start getting angry! So fundamentally, the US Space Force does not have a very bad plan here. As a matter of fact, it's decent, and that is to prime new technologies for space debris removal, and then once you've determined what the best technology is to execute this operation, then you start funding it. But here's the problem. There isn't a lot of money being invested in this. The initial prize for this competition is $250,000, $250,000, a pathetically small amount of money compared to what the United Kingdom has invested, let alone the rest of Europe. And here's another problem. What you're looking at right now is a promotional video from the Surrey Space Center, and they got together with a large number of organizations to create and test these technologies to remove space debris. In other words, the work has already been done. The consortium included organizations like Airbus Defence and Space, Airbus Safran Launchers, which by the way is out of Germany and France and the UK, an organization called ISIS out of the Netherlands, an organization called CSEM out of Switzerland, an organization called INRIA out of France, and finally Stellenbosch University out of South Africa. So the first of these experiments was a net capture experiment, which was deployed by a CubeSat from the ISS at a low velocity, and it inflates a balloon, which, as well as acting as a deorbiting technology, provides a larger target area. And then a net is ejected from the platform when it's at a distance of 7 meters away. The net hits a given target, and deployment masses at the end of the net wrap and entangle the target, and then motor-driven winches reel in the neck of the net, preventing reopening of the net. And then the CubeSat deorbits at an accelerated rate due to the large surface area of the net. And by the way, all of this was carried out successfully. All of the CubeSats were packed in specialist boxes, which were launched to the ISS by a Falcon 9 inside a Dragon crew capsule. And the boxes were then unpacked by the astronauts and installed on a slide table, and the slide table was moved into the ISS Japanese module. And then a special robotic arm grappled the platform and moved it outside the ISS. The arm then released the platform in a very specific direction, and the mission began. All of this has already been done. So let's go through all the rest of the experiments and see how they worked out. Now, first of all, the removed debris platform was provided by the Surrey Satellite Technology Limited Corporation, or SSTL, and utilized a new type of technology called the X50 series of CubeSats. And the architecture is based on a modular and expandable philosophy that utilizes common modules, or so the brochure says. However, it did contain all of the experiments in a very compact platform. It included not only the net system, but also something called a deorbit sail, a harpoon and target assembly, and finally an experiment called the Vision-Based Navigation Experiment in CubeSat, or VBN. This one was also produced by the Surrey Space Center. It was ejected from the platform and utilized not only a visual camera, but also LiDAR, which was produced between Airbus and CSEM, and also INRIA, and then it collected data and sends it back to the platform to the ground for processing. And then, once the images are captured, and you use that information in order to lock onto the target with another debris removal device, such as my favorite, the Harpoon and Deployable Target, which was undertaken by Airbus as well. And what it does is it sends a deployable target outwards from the platform, which is of course used as a target for the Harpoon. It's only 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters, and the Harpoon is designed to fire out at a distance of 1.5 meters, utilizing a flip-out locking mechanism that prevents the tether from pulling out the target. And why is this one my favorite? Well, I guess it's sort of a guilty pleasure. I am a huge fan of Moby Dick. Go get that space debris, Queequeg. I really enjoy this particular type of technology. Yeah, it may not be as useful as the net, but it still succeeded. It was highly accurate and pulled the target in with a great deal of reliability. So we're talking 2 successes at this point, plus the VBN technology proved to be very successful as well. So what do we have left? Well, we have an experiment called a drag sail, which is produced also by the Surrey Space Center, and the purpose is to allow the satellite to deorbit quicker and to burn up faster in Earth's atmosphere if the drag sail were not deployed. And it consists of 2 parts: an inflatable deployer, which extends the sail away from the platform, preventing the sail from hitting any overhanging hardware like antennas, that sort of thing, and secondly, an extension mechanism which uses a motor to unfurl carbon fiber booms that hold the sail membrane. And it's an inflatable mechanism that deploys to a length of 1 meter and self-hardens. And it also proved to be successful. All of this isn't just CGI created stuff. These experiments were actually carried out, and they were successful. As a matter of fact, it won the Surrey Space Center the prestigious Arthur C. Clarke Award. Did anybody hear about this? No, me neither. But instead of investing in these proven technologies, it appears that the U.S. Space Force wants to develop their own, and so as a result, they've put out, quote, an open call for specific ideas and technologies to include concepts or technologies that are not currently solicited. It is important that potential solutions have a high probability of keeping pace with technological change, and there are certain criteria that this technology needs to meet. Number 1, commercialization potential. Number 2, relevance to the defense market, and there's some focus areas associated with that, which I'll talk about in a second. And then finally, technical, or your team. In other words, you need to demonstrate the technical merit for the proposed solution, as indicated by supporting peer-reviewed advocacy, including, but not limited to, scientific articles or publications. Okay, so here's the focus areas. Number 1, on-orbit object approach. So that's pretty obvious. Approach and rendezvous with a resident space object, or RSO, to include space debris, etc., including approach and rendezvous proximity operations, or RPO. Now, secondly, you need on-orbit object acquisition, capture and control the orbital object, and/or perform rendezvous proximity operations docking, RPOD. You can tell that this is a military operation. And then finally, you also need on-orbit object service. Remediate the RSO by repairing, repositioning, refueling, deorbiting, reusing, or recycling. So an end-of-life servicing, or a deorbit maneuver, destination orbits, or mission extension, or finally, reuse or recycling of objects and materials. Lots and lots of different ways of skinning this cat, apparently. But once again, keep in mind, $250,000 for phase 1 of this particular solicitation. So you're talking about a tiny amount of money to fund very sophisticated technology. But maybe phase 1 of this program is not all that complicated. Let's have a look at it. Number 1, you need to clearly identify the prime potential U.S. Space Force end user and Space Force customer transition agent. Okay, not too tough there. Second, deeply explore the problem or benefit area which is to be addressed by the solution. Number 3, define clear and measurable objectives and clear results for a potential trial of the proposed solution with the identified U.S. USSF end user. Number 4, clearly identify any additional specific stakeholders beyond the USSF end user. Number 5, describe how the solution would differ from the non-defense commercial offering. Number 6, describe the cost and feasibility of integration with current mission-specific products. And number 7, describe if and how the demonstration can be used by other DoD or governmental customers. Okay, so it's essentially essentially a very in-depth proposal for this 250 grand. And then once you do that, you move on to phase 2. Phase 2 is to develop, install, integrate, or otherwise demonstrate a prototype system determined to be the most feasible solution during phase 1. And you need to accomplish the following objectives. Number 1, evaluating the proposed solution against the objectives and measurable key results as defined in phase 1. Okay. Number 2, describing in detail how the solution differs from prospective non-defense commercial offerings. Number 3, a clear transition path for the proposed solution that takes into account input from all affected stakeholders. Number 4, specific details about how the solution can integrate with other current and potential future solutions. Number 5, how the solution can be sustainable. And number 6, clearly identify other specific DoD or governmental customers who want to use it. But here's the main thing. You need to demonstrate a prototype system once you have that 250 grand. And how much do you get for this second stage that's going to require that you build a prototype of some kind? Hold on to your seats, guys. $1.5 million. That's it. I don't see how you could deploy something like that into space for $1.5 million, let alone develop the technology in the first place. Now, is this paltry award simply because the Space Force doesn't have a lot of funding? Well, on the contrary, their funding overall is $17.4 billion, nearly as much as NASA gets for all of its activities combined. So this $1.5 million represents 1/100th of 1% of the Space Force's budget. And it's not like they don't have some big dollar items out there as far as contracts are concerned. For example, the contract they just signed with SpaceX to transport military cargo and humanitarian aid around the world, presumably with Starship, received $102 million. So nearly 100 times as much as this incredibly critical space debris removal initiative. Where is the sense of urgency as far as this problem is concerned? Because the U.S. military stands to lose a tremendous amount if something like the Kessler syndrome were to happen, a chain reaction that could wipe out all of their satellites in low Earth orbit. Think of how devastating that would be to the Space Force. And yet, $1.5 million for phase 2 of this project, as opposed to $102 million for point-to-point transportation utilizing Starship. Oh yeah, and they also gave a similar amount of money to Blue Origin for an as-yet undemonstrated and even unnamed rocket to carry the same kinds of cargo. And yet, if you read what the Space Force has to say about this particular contract, boy, they really seem to have a sense of urgency. Quote, as congestion and debris threaten the long-term sustainability of the space domain, Orbital Prime will transition agile, affordable, and accelerated space capabilities to build the foundation for space logistics while preserving the global commons. On-orbit capability will be demonstrated on an accelerated timeline in 2 to 4 years, and their vision is to accelerate transition of technologies and architectures that enable a sustainable space infrastructure and preserves an open and prosperous space domain. Boy, those are very, very admirable goals, and it certainly seems that they want this to happen on a short-term basis. They want to accelerate this development, but they are offering virtually no damn incentive to do it. Now, perhaps they have some commercial partners already signed up who are willing to foot the bill. Perhaps these commercial partners realize that they need to invest a great deal of their own money in this kind of solution. Otherwise, their own satellite networks, their own very expensive constellations are at risk. But if that is indeed the case, the Space Force isn't really saying anything about it. And as far as I'm concerned, the government should should match every commercial dollar that's invested in dealing with this very serious problem that gets worse by the day. But that doesn't seem to be what's happening, and I really can't understand it. I'm frankly at a loss for an explanation. And not only that, I really don't understand why the Space Force isn't simply investing in technologies that have already been proven by the Europeans. We're talking 4 different experiments that went off without a hitch, an organization that received a very prestigious award for accomplishing all of these things, and yet the Space Force doesn't want to invest their money in these technologies, but instead create new ones, homegrown technologies, when there simply is no necessity for doing so. Please subscribe to my channel if you like this kind of hard-hitting content, and if you want to see more of it, please check out the description for various ways that you can support my channel, and you can also receive a number of increasing benefits as time goes on if you decide to become a Patreon supporter. Or if not, I would still be very delighted if you would simply like and subscribe to this channel. So until the Space Force puts their money where their mouth is as far as this serious problem is concerned and attacks it with the same sort of enthusiasm that they attack other defense crises across the planet, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.